Welcome to Face2Face. This is a show about change and about what's next. It's a show that wants to ask questions, peel back the layers of our average everyday experience, and go beyond scratching the surface. We interview amazing people with incredible ideas and stories who have done wild, weird, and wonderful things. Remember that imagination shared creates collaboration, and collaboration creates community, and community inspires social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face2Face. So my next interview was a real treat. It's with Dianne Neal and Richard Popleck, and we talk about their new film, Influence. It premiered at Sundance this year, 2020, and it's going to be having its Canadian premiere at the online Hot Docs Festival this year during this crazy COVID era that we find ourselves in. And you're going to be able to access the film through that platform, but also Hot Docs at Home, CBC. It's going to be airing on GEM as well. So stay tuned for what I think is a brilliant interview. Am I allowed to say that about my own interviews? But conversation, how's that? A brilliant conversation with Dianne and Richard, and so many insights into disinformation and fake news and this current place we find ourselves in. We talk about politics, we talk about civic engagement, about being controlled versus free. We talk about geopolitical fixers. What is that? We talk about disinformation, and Aristotle makes it in there, including talking about things that are wanky and intellectual. We talk about information overload and the glut, lies and untruth, the weaponization of information. We talk about process and curating and disseminating this information, and why knowledge is so often seen and viewed as connected to power. We talk about the politics of spectacle and Martin Luther's notion about the moral arc. And we talk about the luxury of hope as well. And I trust if Richard's listening, he'll be smiling about that as well, as we step into this wonderful, engaging, and thoughtful film, entertaining film about history, a not so distant history, and why we need to start paying attention, and why we need to push back, and why we need to write those letters and be engaged and ask the right questions, ask better questions, peel back those layers, and go in a little deeper. So stay tuned. It's a fascinating film, and I hope an engaging conversation for you about the new film called Influence, going to be premiering here in Canada at online Hot Docs Festival, coming right up. Don't forget davidpecklive.com for more information about my writing and my speaking. You can order a copy of Real Change is Incremental there. And I would love it if you did that. And don't also forget about face2facelive.ca. We're over 500 published interviews now. You can access those anytime you like. Sign up for the newsletter. It comes out once a month. And if you can support us on Patreon, we sure would appreciate that. And if you can't do that, I would really appreciate a review on iTunes. It makes all the difference in the world. Sign up for the newsletter, leave us a review, send this on to your friends, social mediate the heck out of these interviews. I would be thrilled if you could do that for us. We can't kind of do that without you. Spread the news about Face2Face. Things are growing here, and I hope that they're going to continue. I'm not losing any steam. I'm going to be continuing to step into new interviews. I hope, who knows, for the next 5, 10, or 15 years. Who knows where podcasting will be then. So that's about it. And of course, I also appear on rabble.ca. News for the rest of us, a whole host of other thinkers and writers and bloggers there. You can tune in there to find out more about what's happening, rabble.ca. And last but not least, for sure, and if you want to advertise with Face2Face, you can definitely do that. We are now looking for sponsors, currently actively bringing those in the door. You can advertise online with us on the website. You can advertise through our newsletter, or actually shout outs. We're getting hundreds of thousands of unique visits a month to the website. So, might be something worth considering. If you're interested, please reach out to me. You can do that through my email address, david@sochange.ca, but I'm also accessible through the Face2Face website. Coming right up, Richard Popleck and Dianne Neal talking about their new film, Influence. Well, welcome to Face to Face. We're joined by two very special guests. I think actually on the other side of the world. I think I can say that we have Dianne and Neil and Richard Poplack here to talk about their new film, Influence, and going to be a Canadian premiering, I guess, at on CBC, Hot Docs at Home, and also a part of the Hot Docs Festival this year, 2020 in Canada. Diana, Richard, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having us, David.
Yeah, thanks, David.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to have you on Face to Face. I'm not sure what number this interview is going to be, but I'm pretty proud of the fact that we're close to probably around 510 interviews later. Face to Face has been going on for a few years now, and it's always just such a pleasure. And I always step into these conversations with eyes wide open, and I hope ears wide open as well. So, thank you for the time and the commitment and the passion and the effort behind your film Influence, and thanks for a great film. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Yeah.
It's been a journey.
So I bet it's been a journey. Yeah, that's a pretty common response, it seems to me, from filmmakers. So world premiere, I guess, at Sundance earlier this year. The film, you've had Q&As. I'm sure you've done lots of interviews. Can you just, I don't know, can you maybe pull out a soundbite or two for us, maybe, or just a way to provide a little bit of context around this film? I'm going to assume a lot of our listeners right now haven't seen it yet and are wondering if they're going to hit play. So let's give them a good reason to step into your film.
The reason to hit play is because this is, I think, sort of about the most prevalent issue of our time, and that is the disinformation game. It's the story of Lord Tim Bell, who was the most notorious public relations executive turned geopolitical fixer. And he ran a company called Bell Pottinger for a long time. They were a PR firm that would work for anyone in the world under any circumstances and do anything. They were the ultimate geopolitical fixers. So all of the stuff that we talk about now is a matter of course. Fake news, disinformation, misinformation, all the stuff swirling around COVID-19. All of that stuff has a long, long, long genesis that stretches all the way back to Aristotle. But Bell Pottinger were the guys that helped in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. They helped weaponize disinformation in a way we hadn't really seen before.
So I love the fact that right out of the gate, you basically, in the edit, you take a soundbite out of an interview with Lord Tim Bell, and he says something to the effect of, and help me out if I get the people wrong here, but I think the quote is almost a direct quote is, "I have my own morals." Now, yep. on one level, that kind of makes sense, right? We all sort of have our worldviews, our backgrounds, our contexts. You know, you brought up Aristotle. I've been studying philosophy for years, Richard. I love that. You know, we all have sort of these I guess, the bedrocks we stand on. I didn't get that sense from this guy in the same way. So when he said, "I have my own morals," there was like this big question mark, and we're not even 3-4 minutes into the film.
Interestingly, in an early draft of the script that Diane and I were playing with, we once we'd done all our research and done some preliminary interviews, and we're looking to sort of juggle things together. We wanted to base the film, ironically, around the 12 Aristotelian virtues.
Oh, wow.
So there was going to be 12 chapters, each one a virtue that Aristotle had promulgated. It was a little too, a little too on the nose, wanky and intellectual, but it really helped us get to the sense of it. When Lord Bell spoke about values, when he spoke about morals, he did not mean them in the same sense that you and I would. Well, I hope.
Yeah, it's also interesting that you bring up the fame question sort of at the end of, you bookend the film. So you start that sort of with the same kind of, it seems to me, step into this worldview of this guy. What were his morals? What were, where, was it his partner, his wife, his kids? Did he have a check and balance? Was there any kind of sacred text in his background that he went to? You guys were going to go to the virtue ethics of Aristotle. What are some of your thoughts on that? I mean, you had, yeah, exactly. Yeah. You guys had some pretty incredible access to him, clearly. I would imagine too, an awful lot didn't make it into the film.
Yeah, we had 5 days of interviews with him, in fact. We got very lucky in that regard. We were initially promised 3. And so when we just kept showing up at his house and he and his wife kept letting us in, we were both surprised and relieved. But yes, they were pretty illuminating 5 days. And there was plenty of stuff that we wouldn't even be able to put in this film, even if we wanted to, because it's the guy has a very specific sense of humor. And to be fair, he's a very charming man. But when you talk about what he cared about and what was important to him, I guess I'd have to say power and fame. You know, he says towards the end of the film that he's always been drawn to power. And he's always felt that it was the right thing to do to go towards the light, as he called it, and stay by that light and let it shine on you, because that's what makes life interesting. That's certainly what made his life interesting. And I think just by virtue of the way he dropped names, you could tell that it was very important to him to be someone who contributed to the world. Sure, and he did. He had an incredibly illustrious career, and he did some incredibly interesting things. The fact that a lot of those things were morally questionable is, that is the bigger debate. But I think for him, it was really being able to call himself someone who was able to elicit and curry favor with powerful people. And that was, that I think certainly bore him out through his entire career. Interestingly, he started out as someone who I think didn't have that much direction in life. He was a jazz trumpeter for a little while, and then ended up actually physically throwing the trumpet in the trash, I think he said, because he just wasn't any good. And eventually his mother kicked him out of the house at 18 and said, go get a job. And he became a runner in an ad agency. And then from there kind of just blossomed in advertising, figuring out that he was a really good salesman. Being so charming, he could very easily talk his way through pretty much any boardroom. And that's what kicked him off.
Yeah, so he's sort of the quintessential madman accounts guy. But the interesting thing about him is that he understood fame and money, both of which he acquired quite a lot of in his life and lost a lot of in his life as well. But he understood fame and money as being the bedrocks of power. What interested Tim, what fascinated Tim, what Tim was seduced by, and what Tim used to seduce others was power. And when we say power, what we're talking about is some of the most powerful people, I would say, in the last 40, 50 years. We're talking about Margaret Thatcher. We're talking about his proximity to Vladimir Putin, against whom he ran a very successful exile opposition campaign in London in the mid 2000s. The weird thing about Lord Bell's life, when you look at it in context, is how many powerful people he came close to and how much work he did for them all over the world. So one of the things we're trying to say about power in this film is the fact that the connections between the powerful, between the global elite, and I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist here, because this is not what I'm going for at all, but these connections are very, very, very articulated. If you carry a letter in Margaret Thatcher's handwriting and go, say, unannounced to the presidential palace in Santiago, Chile, during curfew, the dictator, Augusto Pinochet, will let you into the presidential palace. Now that's power. And that's exactly what happened with Lord Bell in Santiago in the mid-'80s.
It's so interesting to me that he uses this image, metaphor, symbol of light. Now, I don't think I misunderstood it, but light for him is a step towards that power, a step closer towards that fame, it seems to me. Whereas, Aristotle or Plato or, many other moral philosophers would say light, that's exactly the antithesis of what we were going for, right? So when Plato leads you up out of the allegory of the cave, it's into the light, it's into knowledge, it's into wisdom, right? And moral living. Whereas Lord Tim Bell, for him, the light is actually the spotlight. Isn't that the vanity of the spotlight, I guess you could say?
That's very true, but I would develop that sort of intellectual concept one step further. And I think what Dianne and I, when we talk about light now, we think about transparency. And you can extrapolate transparency in the context of this film one step further, and that is information overload, the glut right? One of the things
yes.
that Lord Bell and Bell Pottinger did very well, especially towards the end of their tenure as one of the most powerful PR firms in history, was to flood the zone with bullshit, to flood the zone with endless amounts of information. And now those tactics have basically become de rigueur. So where initially Dianne and I may have fell into the old journalistic trap of thinking of blanket transparency as a good thing, as access to information as a good thing, we've learned the very hard way over the course of the research for this project that transparency, that information overload, that so-called knowledge can be very dangerous as well.
Mm.
Yeah, look, it comes down to what the intention behind it is, of course, but we're not by no means saying that too much information is a bad thing. I think the question really is, what is the purpose of that information, and what is it really? What's the benefit of it? What is it actually giving the world in terms of knowledge, in terms of usefulness? And I think that's something that the disinformation reality that we live in now has kind of completely subverted, which is, as long as there's noise in the space, as long as there's information swirling around you, it's very difficult to make good decisions and to understand what's best for your well-being and the well-being of your society and of your family and of your community. And to just create that noise is a way of distracting and obfuscating that has been extremely successful, as we've seen in these massive world events in the last 4 years: the Trump election, Brexit, and now COVID-19.
And David, it is. Sorry, I just
go, Richard. Yeah, go.
It is astonishing that these things that we used to, these old shibboleths, knowledge is power. Information is a good thing. It's a public good. It's brain nutrition. Knowledge and information no longer bear the same meaning they did 10 years ago. I mean, to us, that's just an astonishing fact that knowledge, or rather information, how we process it, how it's curated, how it's disseminated, these things have become weapons. And to us, that is a remarkable historical development.
Yeah, process, curate, and disseminate. I mean, near the end of the film, I think, and I can't remember who's questioning it. Maybe was it Marianne, the journalist from the Daily Maverick,
our colleague? Yeah,
yes,
yeah. I'm not sure if it was her or not, but something about no one's measuring it, no one understands it. I mean, the question's raised? How do we even recognize what's true anymore? If I remember, sort of, that's my Peckian paraphrase there. Sorry about that.
That's fine. It's actually a gentleman called Joel Harding, who is an intelligence expert in the United States and was deeply involved in a lot of their ops over the last 10, 20 years, who commented on the Iraq campaign, actually, that Bell Pottinger was paid for. Yeah. Very, very interesting guy.
Well, and in some ways, kind of the ironic weight behind that is pretty clear, right? Intelligent expert talking about we can't measure it,
exactly.
We can't understand
that's what's so terrifying.
It's fantastic. Yeah, it's just so troubling.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So did you feel, as one of my favorite documentaries, and I've got quite a few on that list, it would be really probably hard for me to do a top 10, but I think in my top 10 would be Errol Morris's Fog of War with McNamara. I was actually in Cambodia when I saw it, come out, and was just, what is that, maybe 2000, something like that. And he talks about Lord Tim Bell, LTB. Can I call him LTB? Out of the gate, he says something about, maybe I'll be better judged if I tell the truth. Do you think? I mean, I got that sense from McNamara a little bit as Morris goes on through the film Fog of War. Did he really want that? Like, was he really sort of trying to come clean? I love Diana too, by the way, that you said he and his wife continued to let you guys into the house. So you must have been doing something right.
Well, yeah, maybe for the first 4 days. The fifth day was strained. Let's put it that way.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
No, we ended that particular visit. We ended on good terms. And then unfortunately the relationship soured some months later, I think, when it became, when I think the stakes were raised, and I think Lord Bell's wife, Jackie, I think it became clear to her that she would have to deal with this probably on her own, because he then passed away in August of last year.
Yes. So I think, when it comes to Errol Morris's Fog of War, which I think is probably on everyone's top 10 list, and obviously it was sort of top of mind, at least when we started conceiving of this film. But the weird and rather terrible thing to say about how things have progressed since Morris sat down with McNamara is that the bullshit industry has only tripled down since then. The lines between truth and lies have completely been obliterated, to no small extent because of men like Lord Bell. So I don't think we were under any illusions whatsoever that we were going to have some old dude sit down and completely spill his guts to us. He proved slippery to the last. There were so many things that he said to us that when it got down to the fact check stage, just didn't hold up.
Right.
Almost everything he said came with the yes, but. He refused to countenance the fact that he may have done anything wrong over the course of his career. Now, none of us can say we're blameless, except, of course, for Lord Timothy Bell. So the unfortunate aspect of the I'm going to tell the truth and nothing's going to stop me aspects of the film were that he remained slippery to the last, which to us is, of course, entirely emblematic of the type of person he was and the type of work that he did.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why we included the blatant, the most blatant of the kind of untruths, or the frankly the lies that he told, where Richard kind of pushes back on one of his statements, and he then, without batting an eyelash, just says, well, yeah, I did do that. I did it 10 years earlier, and there's no sense of kind of shame about it. It's just it's to me, the way I kind of see it, because I've thought about this a lot, is he's a strategist, to the last. I mean, and I'd love to tell you a story about that actually in a minute. To me, it's always about the game. He'll say something, and it's almost like he takes such joy from being in the conversation, because he gets to put out his kind of, he makes his play, and then he watches what you do, and if he respects it, then he'll acquiesce. And if he doesn't, then he'll just disregard it.
I'd love to hear the story. And Dianne, it makes me immediately think, and I have a few friends who are lawyers, and they're probably going to smile at my not so nuanced understanding of the work they do. But there's in the legal world, it seems to me, well, I'm being paid, therefore I need to win. This isn't necessarily about my ethics or morality, if you want to make that distinction. This is about stepping in. I've got a client. It's about strategy. It's a chess move. Right?
Exactly.
On some level, I would imagine it's quite an energizing and adrenalized kind of a game. I was blown away.
And that's exactly what it is.
Right. I was blown away when you had him. You were talking about, I had no idea that he had been, in the 70s up into the 80s in Chile and Pinochet. And I had a former philosophy professor who lost family members under that regime. And so when he just sort of cavalierly almost talked about the great missing people, and then said, "Oh, nothing to do with me." Wow, really? Like, and you still sleep at night? Is my question.
Very well, I'm sure. Yeah, there's a sense of being able to compartmentalize things, right? He wasn't part of that campaign. He didn't defend Pinochet during that time. He wasn't the guy who was, spinning the coup. So it's easy for him to say, well, nothing to do with it, therefore it's of no concern to me. And if that's his reputation, then that's something that I need to, it's a problem that I need to solve by being the smarter person in this game. And if you don't like it, then those are your morals, not mine. Don't force them on me.
Don't force them on me, right?
But David, you made a very, 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 very good observation about him being similar in tactics to legal professionals. One of the things that Bell Pottinger did very well, especially in the latter years, was to combine forces with very, very powerful legal firms in London. I'm talking about Schillings and Carter Ruck in particular, where it would be sort of a 1-2 punch. Bell Pottinger would do the spin, Carter Ruck or Schillings would do the litigious work on the background. Now, I was actually on the back of exactly that type of campaign, long before the Bell Pottinger story in South Africa broke, where I'd put out something in an article, I'd get an email from some junior partner at Bell Pottinger saying cease and desist, or we'll sick our lawyers on you. That's exactly how they worked. As it progressed, as it weaponized, public relations became a species of legal action, a species of litigiousness. So the spin and the legal aspect were one holistic package.
Right. And you see that very clearly in the leaks, David. So just for your listeners, just to give some context, the provenance of the film was this tranche of leaked emails that came to light in 2017 during a very, very difficult time politically for our country. We had this president, Jacob Zuma, who was, just insanely corrupt, and we knew, journalists knew, the public knew that he had this a very close relationship with this family of Indian businessmen called the Guptas. And then this leak of emails from one of their servers, or from their emails, came to our editor at Daily Maverick, Branko Brikic, and he put a team together of journalists from around the country, and they started to kind of excavate these emails. And what you see looking through them, when you take the Bell Pottinger stuff out of that and you just look at those, was, I would say probably half to a third of them is interactions between the Gupta faction, Bell Pottinger and Schilling's, or Bell Pottinger's lawyers, deciding, okay, this journalist has said this thing in this publication today. What's the strategy? Okay, Bell Pottinger's going to get the lawyers to send this legal letter. And I mean, most of those emails are just them asking for legal action against any and all commentary, basically, by journalists during that time, about, I guess, a year before the leaks happened. So while they were being paid this enormous retainer to do this work in South Africa, they were just, they were putting out the messaging, fomenting this race war basically in South Africa, but at the same time they had their lawyers taking down or threatening or threatening legal action against the journalists who were obviously looking into this. So it's just very interesting to see that tactic and how successfully it works.
Hence one of the reasons for the title of the film, Influence.
Right, exactly.
Diana, can you tell us a little bit about the story that you wanted to unpack?
Sure.
About strategist, I think it was connected to strategist to the last.
Yeah. So I don't know which version of the film you saw. The version we took to Sundance was a longer cut, about 106 minutes, I guess. And we subsequently cut it down to 90 minutes. It's a much kind of more concise cut, I guess you could say. But in the original cut, Bell references this businessman, the South African businessman called Johann Rupert, who's one of the richest men in Africa, one of the richest in the world, very, very successful. And he was a long-term acquaintance of Tim Bell's, and his company Richemont was essentially Bell Pottinger's client for 20 years. And this gets a little complicated, but I'll try to keep it simple. So the campaign in South Africa involved creating it was a race-based campaign, using terms like white monopoly capital and radical economic transformation to basically assert that all of the wealth in South Africa still remained in the hands of white people, and that black people were losing out, and that through this, the Guptas were trying to empower people of color, and that they were the victims, essentially, of this white monopoly capital. And Johann Rupert was made to be the face of that kind of campaign, one of them at least, which is deeply ironic if you think about it, because he's the client of the company that is now essentially smearing him in the press and people like him, from one end of the field to the other. So it was this incredibly confusing campaign. But I think Bell saw his endorsement as a way of proving his innocence in the whole debacle, because up until the last, he tried to say that it wasn't his campaign. He wasn't involved. He was just kind of overseeing and was taken out of that role. And so he was, when it all came to light, what had happened, and he went on BBC Newsnight, I guess it was in September, about 2 or 3 months after the whole, the company had kind of shut down and was going into liquidation. He was asked to appear on BBC Newsnight, and during the interview, his phone, which was switched on, rings in his pocket.
It's a remarkable scene. Like, it's almost as if you guys set him up for that. Like, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. But anyway,
Well,
go ahead.
it is. So we watching it for the first time. I personally just assumed that he was, he'd forgotten to switch his phone off, or he's getting older. He's maybe a bit nervous, whatever. It was a mistake because it rings twice and he kind of fumbles over it. But in the first instance, he shows the phone to the interviewer, which is highly unorthodox. I mean, who does that? Shows the phone to her to show her who's calling. And she doesn't take the bait. She just breezes through it and carries straight on. So he puts the phone back in his pocket. And then in a subsequent interview that we shot with him, the question is asked who was on the phone, and he says, "Oh, it was Johan. It was Johan Rupert. He was messaging to say thank you for being the only honorable person in the story." Now, I mean, that is some next level genius strategy. If you think about it, this is the guy who's been exonerated by this campaign. Despite being the client of Bell Pottinger, who is now messaging him to say, I believe you and you did the right thing and I stand by you. And, it's just always been so interesting to me to know, whether he set it up, which, I'm pretty, my guess is he did, and that he got him to call him at just the time that he knew that he would be on this show and that he could say, oh, look, it's Johan Rupert calling. And, I'm the good guy. And this proves it, which is pretty ballsy.
So you're saying by design for sure.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I reckon. So does Johan Rupert.
That's pretty wild. I have a friend who's an entertainer. He's a comedian, and it reminds me. I was at the back of the room, and he said, "You know what? Tonight, can you call me when I'm on stage?" So I actually phoned him from the back of the room, and I walked outside, sort of the main part of the building, into the lobby, and we had this conversation. And I don't really know what he did with it on stage, but it reminds me of that. It's just so sort of in the moment, but it shows you how carefully constructed. I mean, to your point earlier, you bring it out in the film that this idea of weaponization takes on very different forms.
Absolutely.
So you guys, there's so many other things I want to address and talk about, but you do bring in this idea of art versus science, and I'd love to hear where you stand on that after years in journalism, after working on this film for a few years, several years, I would imagine. There's an assumption made that, and I think the direct quote, that this is no longer guesswork now. Right. We can, this is a workable weapon, I think was the line. Right. And we can step in now. Would you say that still is the case? Is it becoming more workable, more weaponized, more, I guess, almost
absolutely.
black and white in a sense?
Absolutely. So if we look at the genesis just in the last 50 years, leading out of the Nazi campaigns in World War II, where influence, while heavily focused on making crowds do what you wanted them to, was still effectively an art. There was no science behind what the Nazis were doing in terms of inciting racial or ethnic hatred within the German population group. What they were doing was still what people had been doing for years. They had the newsreel, which they could use. They had cinema, which they could use, music, etc., etc. But those were effectively old tools. We move out of there into the age of television, where we have television advertising. Television advertising effectively turns propaganda to an art form, right? You have the 30-second or a minute to tell a very distinct story, and that story functions in a propaganda way to incite people to do things. But leading into the 90s, you had a bunch of people in the West, and this is leaving aside what the KGB were doing in the 80s, the 70s and 80s, and they are leagues ahead of where we are, the Russians. But in the West, what you had was a group of people, one of whom was Nigel Oakes, who ended up setting up a strategic communications laboratory, which would in the end become the holding company for the world-famous Cambridge Analytica. Nigel Oakes, who was interviewed extensively in our film, explained to us how in the mid-90s, he and others started to aggregate social sciences within academia to learn how to get crowds to behave exactly the way you wanted them to. In other words, what they were doing was taking the research that was out there, compiling it, turning it into effectively, you could say, weaponized surveys that would tell you exactly what you needed to know about the prejudices of crowds. They were not interested in individual behavior. what David Peck has for breakfast at 7:20 a.m. is of absolutely no interest to them. What is of interest is that David's entire neighborhood gets in their car at 8 o'clock and drives over the bridge at 8:03. So it's manipulating crowds that became the focus, manipulating audiences that became the focus. As that progressed, it starts to meet round about 2000, the internet, where companies like Google and later Facebook start to collect and collate what they call behavioral surplus. In other words, the stuff we do online. Every time we type a search into Google, what they give to us is the answer to what we're searching for. What they collect from us is all the residual data. What time are we looking for? What are we looking for? When are we looking for it? Where are we looking for it from? So all of that behavioral surplus is collated, and that is turned into a raw product that is refined and sold down the line. Call it big data, right? So the confluence between the development of behavioral science and behavioral surplus combines to form what we could call at this stage the ability to weaponize information and to manipulate crowds in what you could arguably call a scientific way.
I love the shot you include of Donald Trump hugging the flag, and I think the voiceover talks about politics becoming theater. And I mean, is this is kind of, would you guys agree this is sort of bringing the two together, that scientific approach that crowds behave in a particular way, but let's throw in a little bit of comedy and art and rhetoric and hyperbole as well, right?
Well, I think you make a good point there, because effectively what Cambridge Analytica did was pass on to the Trump campaign a whole bunch of collated data about how Americans were thinking and how they were willing to behave under certain conditions. At the same time, you had essentially a clown, a buffoon, who had, and you've got to give it to Donald Trump, perfected the politics of spectacle. Right, something that academics, journalists, and media critics had been complaining about for years. This idea of the politics of spectacle, our understanding that this would eventually eat away at the core bedrock of democracies. But now, what this buffoon, this clown, who in ordinary circumstances one would like to think would never have won so much as a mayoral race in a tiny town in Arkansas, instead is the leader of the free world. Why? Because that spectacle is now married to a scientific basis of how to get crowds to behave a certain way at a certain time.
And I think what Nigel understood very early, I mean, as early as the late 80s, after having worked at Saatchi & Saatchi as well, the advertising company in London where Lord Bell was also at, was that understanding crowds and human attitudes is different to understanding their behavior. And where advertising was very successful in attitudinal change, you know, what, do you want to drink a Coke or a Pepsi? Is your attitude towards Coke or Pepsi, you know, which one do you like more? It becomes, you know, what really interested him and what propelled him into this so-called science was that's great, but how do you actually then affect change in their behavior? Because that, of course, is I guess the holy grail of this kind of work. It's great if they like something or don't, but then you want them to then make that connection and take that next step, which is the action. And that was the critical shift, I think, away, as you say, from art towards science. Was that distinction?
Well, you know, it's really interesting. So Nigel, I found fascinating. I mean, I think he actually talks about the influence as an influence industry, and you know, and I think you were just talking about this, Dianne, about, you know, in the difference between informing you and changing your behavior. So it's almost as if there's a distinction in product, right? We don't want to sell you a Coke or a Pepsi. We actually want to sell you a way of life, I guess, I suppose, a better way of life, or at least that's the implication. And when we do that, we're going to create more power for us and more wealth at the same time. Like, is that an oversimplification?
Well, I mean, it's even just to say, well, you know, drink this Coke and then drink this Pepsi, and let us kind of analyze what we can. Let's take what we can glean from that action, and use it, you know, and compile it over, you know, 500 people or 1,000 people. It's maybe not the best example, but the point is is really, how you behave in relation to that either product or that stimulus or that situation, as opposed to what you think about it, because then you can learn so much more about people, that is marketable, that you can sell. It becomes a product, and that's exactly what's happened with big data, as Richard was saying. You can then go to advertisers and say, hey, look, we've learned this much about this entire population, and it's relevant to you for this and this and this reason, and you can use this to sell your products in this way. I mean, that's probably on the more innocuous end. Then, of course, you have the political side of that, which becomes a lot more malevolent, potentially. But yeah, that was the innovation of that time, was understanding that it's not about what people think, it's about what they do.
Mm. So you end, I think, with was her Nick? I can't remember her full name right now, but Tiger Claus, who's a very important part of this story.
Her name is Villa van Dam.
Yes, wonderful. A bit of her personality really comes through, which is utterly brilliant. But it's a little bit more of that sense of change and pushing back, and pushing back against the status quo actually can get us somewhere, can be meaningful. The moral arc does bend towards justice. Are you guys hopeful? I mean, do you believe that? And then I think I want to follow that up with a question. Is that kind of what you're hoping people, one of the things, at least, there's many things, but one of the things people take away, that sense of, you know what, maybe it is time to write that article. Maybe it is time to step into politics. I can also affect change too.
So, David, we don't allow ourselves the luxury of hope. We're here.
Wow.
We're here in South Africa. We have dogs in the fight. We do this work every day. We battle these creatures every day. And the truth of the matter is that what our film shows is that in a very particular instance here in South Africa in 2017, the South African people were able to expose what Bell Pottinger was doing for Jacob Zuma, our former president, and a deeply corrupt leader. We were able to expose what he was doing. We were able to show the public very simply, without any tricks, what was happening because of good, dogged, hardcore investigative journalism. We showed everybody what was happening. And once people had this information, which again wasn't bullshit, it was very simple, they were free to do with it what they wished. And what they wished was to rise up, not only on the ground, and there were big protests on the ground, but also on Twitter, where the very weapons that Bell Pottinger were using against us to racially divide us were all of a sudden turned on them. South Africans are very sophisticated at this stage about how Twitter works, about who lies on Twitter and why. And so that experience of battling Bell Pottinger has taught us certain tricks and has made us understand how dangerous these tools can be. Now, that doesn't make us any more coherent a society, largely because we are so unequal, so divided, and the wounds of apartheid have not been allowed to heal. Nonetheless, we did rise up as a unified mass and get rid of Jacob Zuma. And I think that is a lesson for the world.
Yeah, I think, and that was such an amazing time to live through. And I think it meant so much to those of us who did and who were here and were part of it. And I think since then, I think there has been a sense of, well, what next? We were able to do this, and now we've kind of fallen back into our morose, unhopeful ways. But I think as it relates to disinformation and this kind of what feels like this increasingly endless amount of noise and chaos that we're being kind of exposed to with information online, which is where so many of these battles are now taking place. I think it's very easy to feel completely inundated with negativity and with this information. But what we've come to learn in the last few days, weeks, months is that there is a concerted effort to try to combat these factors. In 2016, nobody was using the word disinformation. Fake news was a Trumpian invention. It's not that those tools weren't around; they just weren't being used by every Tom, Dick, and Harry to create chaos for various different reasons, being their monetization or political gain or whatever. But the point is just that, nobody was paying any attention, and nobody really took it seriously. And then it exploded, and now it's the reality that we live in. But what's happened in that time is that there are people who understand how to hunt these kind of what they call bad actors or malevolent actors down and shut them off at the source. And companies like Facebook and Twitter, while, I believe very much part of the problem, who have much, much more work that they need to do and contribute, are giving resources and putting resources towards empowering analysts and researchers to understand and learn about, fake news, so-called fake news and disinformation, where it comes from and why it's being used, and trace it all the way down the line and shut it down and take it down and try to make sure that it doesn't spring up again. So, there is a fight back. It's still small, and I think it still feels a little overwhelmed at this point. But I do think that people are starting to come around to the idea that this is unsustainable. Our societies cannot live in these echo chambers of just noise and chaos. It's overwhelming, and it creates fear, it creates division, and we've got enough of that already. So I think there's definitely a sense that this needs to be tackled, and I think slowly but surely over the days and weeks, and hopefully as a result of COVID-19, there will be more of there'll be more impetus to really figure out how to tackle this and get things back to some kind of balance in that regard.
And David, one important thing. These weapons are very, very real. The Russians, the Chinese, they are far less concerned, if they're concerned at all, with what we think of as conventional kinetic weapons. They are concerned primarily with non-kinetic weapons. In other words, disinformation, malevolent information. But these are weapons that can only be useful in certain conditions. And the conditions are this. When you are someone going to work at Tim Hortons for $14 an hour, you have to travel 2 hours into the city of Toronto because rent in Toronto is $2,500 a month. In other words, your existence is so economically perilous that you, in fact, see the world around you as completely unsustainable. Where there are others in the city who are living completely different lives. So our societies are so classed and so divided along economic lines and also ethnic lines, etc., that these weapons are very, very, very easily detonated. And the effects, as we've seen all over the world, can be completely devastating. So if you want to fix the disinformation problem, go right ahead. Go dig up all the bad actors on Facebook that you want. But until we address the core issues in our societies, I can tell you right now, and Diana can reconfirm it, there is no way to fix misinformation weapons.
Yeah, it's. I think, unfortunately, that's where we're going to have to wrap it up. I know you guys have another call or meeting coming up, and I, what I love about great films like this, they're just so layered. There's so much going on, so much more going on than meets the eye. And after 42 minutes, I feel like we barely scratched the surface. It's fantastic. I hope you can hear the smile in my voice, in the tone of my voice. I just want to say thank you to you both for taking the time today to chat about your film. And the film, by the way, folks, is Influence, influence.film. You can find it online. And maybe Diana, you could just sort of help us wrap up here by talking a little bit about how it's going to be airing very soon, CBC Hot Docs at Home, but also a part of the festival this year, which is all going to be online.
Yeah, absolutely. We're very happy to be part of the Hot Docs Festival, and also as a film that's been supported very generously by Hot Docs. So it's a big deal for us. We were really looking forward to being in Toronto, but nevertheless, the film will be on CBC and CBC Gem at 8 p.m. on the 21st of May and at 9 p.m. on Documentary Channel. And we do hope people will tune in. I believe that it's in the usual national hockey slot. So I hope people won't be too resentful of the fact that we're not putting guys in, with hockey sticks and big masks on, but hopefully this will be somewhat entertaining.
It will be bloodier and nastier, that's for sure.
That's right. Richard, I think the title of your next film should be The Luxury of Hope.
You know what?
I like that.
That's
That's
actually not bad.
That's
Yeah,
really
It's
good.
not
get
bad, right?
working on that.
Or at least maybe your autobiography. Is that a possibility? Yeah.
Yeah, we'll work on
Yeah.
it. We'll
Yeah, you'll work on it.
uh,
Listen, thank you so much for your time today. We've been talking with Dianne and Neil and Richard Pavlek about their new film Influence here today on Face to Face. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.